Thank you. And we can get started, I guess. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's Friday. Yay, Friday. Yesterday, so we were just talking to Heather, which I'll introduce in just a second. But yesterday was Keller Williams Red Day. So Red Day is on the second Thursday of every May. We cease doing business. We focus on giving back, whether it's fundraising or some sort of community effort. Yesterday, Heather, we did two different things. So one was we fed a bunch of, I want to say about 300 families. We fed them food. We teamed up with a local company, a little harvest, gathered a bunch of resources, fed them at Kamakana Ali'i, which is on the west side. But simultaneously, so last year we did another one, but we fed almost 1,000 people. We didn't have as many resources this year as last year. So we also partnered up with the city and county of Honolulu and removed invasive species from a park in, was it Eva Beach? Yeah, kind of, right? West Block area, right? And it was really good. They partnered up with some local students from Kapolei High School who gave kind of the history of what they were doing and why they're doing it. And it was really good. And it was very competitive. Ray wants everyone to know that her team was the best team. And they worked far harder than everyone at the food distribution, but it's all good stuff. So thank you guys for those who participated. And in all honesty, we want to make sure that we don't do just Red Day, just that, which is great that we do it once a year, but Red Day should be far more frequently. And I would love to do those kind of things on a quarterly basis or even a monthly basis. So look out for invites to try to do some community effort kind of thing. But today we're at Monthly Mindset. It is not a sales thing. It is not real estate related. I literally Googled who is the very best therapist in all the lands, not Honolulu, but all the lands, especially now because currently she's broadcasting live from Chicago. And up the results came Heather. So Heather is a local therapist from Hawaii, not from Hawaii, in Hawaii, and she's phenomenal. She teaches this class once a month. I think she's been with us now for a year and a half or so, or longer.
I think it's actually a little longer than that, but yeah.
10 years. This is 10 years going strong.
I was 18 when I joined the KW team.
Fresh out of high school, unqualified at the time before she got her degree. And she's phenomenal. She's a great addition to our leadership and the classes that we offer to everyone. And I will tell you this, Heather, I didn't tell you this the last time, but a testament to this thing, because mental health is super important to me. I've had a lot of agents tell me that as a result specifically of Monthly Mindset, some of them have gone to you and asked you for referrals or come to you themselves, which is fantastic. But some of them have sought out therapy on their own, which is, to me, that's the reason why we do this, because if it at least triggers something to go, maybe I gotta look inward or get some help or talk to someone, that's exactly what this is for. It is a safe place and space for someone to kind of work things out and to learn a few things. And with that being said, Heather, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I feel like I say this every month, but your introductions just keep getting like more and more glowing. And eventually my head is not going to fit through the door of a airplane to come home. But thank you. That's very kind of you. And I do so appreciate not just our relationship, but the invitation to come and share space with you guys. May is actually Mental Health Awareness Month. So happy Mental Health Awareness Month to all of you. Just opportunities for us to not necessarily, go all the way to seeking help or even like obtaining help, but just creating awareness around things that we struggle with, things that we're really good at that we can share with our peers, things that maybe we didn't know about the world of mental health, such as there's a very broad spectrum of the types of help that you can get, everything from check-ins with peers to, obviously hospitalization and things like that. But raising awareness around mental health is one of my passions in our community. And I'm really so grateful because this is, for me, such a cool opportunity to share space with folks that I might not always get the chance to share space with. So I'm super stoked to be here with all of you today on Friday the 13th, which is just such a weird day, right? Like all the sort of like suspicions and stuff around like Friday the 13th and what it means. Like when I was a kid, I can remember watching like scary Jason movies. And now I watch them and I'm like, how was I frightened of this? Like, this is just so silly and ridiculous. But anyway, happy Mental Health Awareness Month. Happy Friday the 13th. Happy post KW Red Day. Thank you all for giving back to your community. So last month we talked about the highly sensitive person, and we had an extraordinary conversation afterwards about it. And I actually left Mindset last month feeling like it was kind of unfinished. I felt like there were still questions or comments. We had some discussion around the similarities between HSP and introverts, and even kind of autism spectrum disorder, and people wanted to ask questions about things like that. So I thought it would be a good idea to do a little recap, just in case you weren't here last month, but also to talk, dive a little bit deeper about some of the really amazing things about HSPs, because I do think last month we focused on some of the challenges that HSPs can have. So super excited to talk about this with you guys. I am joining you from Chicago, but I will be back soon, so do not fret. So why the follow-up? Well, you know, I try to pay attention to the things that you guys find interesting and the things that you guys are really engaged with. And that to me isn't necessarily about the number of people that join, but really about the conversation that happens. Because when the sessions or the topics are interesting to you guys, you'll come up with lots of good questions and feedback. And, you know, like I said, I felt a little bit unfinished at the end of last Mindset. So thought I would read a little bit deeper into the book. The plane gave me a good opportunity to do that. And I've kind of put together a little deeper understanding of it. So when we talk about things like highly sensitive people, what it does is it creates an opportunity for us to have a little bit of space to understand ourselves. How do we interact with ourselves? How do we interact with our environment? What types of environments are conducive to us feeling healthy? How do we relate to our peers, our workplace peers, our spouses, partners, our families, our friends, even other professionals that we network with? So the more that we can understand the types of personalities and the types of things in terms of like the traits of how we communicate with each other, the more that we can understand about that, the more conducive our conversations will be and the more effective we will feel. When we feel effective, we tend to interact in our environment in a healthier way. And when we start to understand the behaviors and the idiosyncrasies and the things that could be going on with other people, it helps us to foster healthier relationships. So rather than assuming that because somebody's quiet, it means they don't care for you, you can think to yourself, maybe that person has introvert tendencies and they like quiet because quiet helps them work better. Oh, maybe that person's quiet because the fluorescent lights in our office are really hard to sit in all day long, and it becomes hard for their brain to process that information. So maybe I'll just try and find them a different space to live or ask for meetings outside the office, things like that. So really what we're doing is trying to create space for you all to think even more outside the box of sort of your stereotypical day. And I left this stat at the end of this slide because I think it's so interesting that like literally 20% of our population are thought to be highly sensitive. If you think about that, like right now I'm looking at my Zoom screen and there's 5 of you at the top of it. That means like one of you is definitely an HSP. So I think what that does is not just encourage me to talk more about it, but encourage me to help you guys understand it. So, okay, the things that I would love for you to recall or remember from last month so that we can have a kind of robust understanding of what we're going to go into deeper is when Aaron and Aaron, I again don't know if they were married or brother or sister, so forgive me, but what they did was they started to see differences between introversion and folks who were considered sensitive. And the idea of sensitivity comes with this kind of semi-negative overtone where you use it a little bit as an attack, right? Like, oh, why are you being so sensitive? Like, it's not about you. Oh, like, why are you taking that so personally? It's not about you. But they really found that those folks were not emotionally sensitive. They were just handling the situation or the feedback differently than somebody who maybe was less sensitive. So they started to look at introversion, thinking that maybe introversion and HSP were combined, but what they found was through their research, introverts tend to be a personality trait, and HSP tends to be neurological. So there are some trends that it's genetic, and there are some pretty cool research studies that demonstrate that it's more biological than it is learned. So I think that's actually in last month, I think that's where somebody asked about autism spectrum disorder. And I did not go into a whole lot of depth about that because ASD is actually quite complicated. But HSP is now considered to be a biological or neurological phenomenon. So it exists in your body and in your chemical makeup, as opposed to something that you learn over time, like introversion. The second part of the kind of interesting thing about that too is that one of the telltale markers of an introvert is that they require significant time to recharge after a high anxiety or high energy event. They almost always need to do that alone. So even in like the healthiest of relationships, a partner who is pretty confident in their introversion will really need time away from that partner to be able to actually physically feel better about their day to day. Folks who are highly sensitive may not need that. They may just be overstimulated when the environment is something that they cannot handle within their capacity. HSPs tend to process things. We call it stimuli. This is everything from like lights, noise, how loud your headphones are, how much music is playing at the grocery store, when you can see too many people in front of you, when you feel like people are standing too close to you. Folks who are highly sensitive tend to take extra time to process that type of information. And usually what happens is, you guys know that I'm a self-proclaimed, and it's not a diagnosis, but diagnosed HSP. We tend to become initially defensive when somebody is like coming into our space, right? So my perfect example is in the grocery store. I loved the 6 feet rule because it gave me an opportunity to like stand further away from people in the grocery line, as opposed to have somebody come right up to the belt and put the thing on there and then come stand right next to me and just like eagerly wait for the checkout guy to get to them. I loved having the 6 feet in between people. So I'm sort of getting used to not having that, but it takes us longer to be able to process the frustration that we feel when someone is standing close to us or when something is loud. And so in relationships, this can be that interesting part where when you meet a new friend and you think like, do they like me or do they not like me? They're kind of quiet. They're not really giving me any feedback. HSPs on both sides can tend to take longer to be able to talk to each other about the connection. The reason that we process stimuli deeply is because we want to create a healthy connection with that other person, but it may not always seem obvious. And when HSPs are on the receiving end of that, we tend to ask a lot more questions about whether somebody else cares to be around us. So that can actually create some trickiness when it comes to connecting with other people. However, there is still lots of really wonderful things about HSPs, and it does actually create a lot of benefits when it comes to emotional intelligence. And in their research, Erin found that about 30% of the people that they studied that were kind of firmly rooted in highly sensitiveness were actually extroverted, and they thrived off of social stimulation, thrived off of being busy, thrived off of attention and things like that. So I mean, you would assume that people who have a lot of sensitivity to their environment would tend to be more internal, but it's not that way. So as we continue to do research around this type of this type of neurological phenomenon, I'm hoping that we, figure out more parallels with personality traits and things like that, so we can really understand how to utilize the specific and sort of unique skills of HSPs. I wanted to remind you guys of the website where you can go and take a quiz to see if you are HSPs. There's a lot of information in this slide deck that could sort of give you an indication one way or the other. It took me about 5 pages of the book for me to realize that this is what I was dealing with. But the website's pretty cool. It's hsperson.com. So you can go and kind of play around with some of the resources that are in there. There's articles and things like that to help determine if this is something that you manage. There are 4 main characteristics of an HSP, and you do need to meet most of these to be considered formally HSP. Again, I apologize for the spelling of subtleties. I really want it to be subtitles, but it's not. For those of you that were here last month, you remember I'm having a really, really difficult time with the spelling of that word because my brain wants to make it something else. But I'll start with that one. HSPs tend to notice things to a much deeper extent than the sort of typical human does. So I'll give you a perfect example. We were at my sister's house the other night. My sister is married to the most lovely human. They have 2 children. And we were sitting in the living room with a couple of my other family members. And I became very irritated very quickly because the TV was on, the kids were playing video games like with sound. My brother-in-law and one of the children was having a conversation over here. And then my aunt was sitting here trying to have a conversation with me. And my sister was talking to her neighbor who was standing over here. And like all of a sudden my brain was like, okay, I don't want to sit here anymore. So I'm going to get up. So I like went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water and then had to like take a deep breath. But I started to notice all the subtleties of everything that was going on, right? Like my brother-in-law was sort of scolding my nephew. And then my aunt was like trying to engage me in a conversation about what we were going to do the next day. And it just became like so overwhelming that I had to remove myself from the room because it was just very overstimulating. So first of all, we'll go to the corner part. The overstimulation became very overwhelming and I literally had to remove myself, but I was trying to actually process the information of all of these things at once, which is where the depth of processing became kind of like a computer when it gets overheated, right? I couldn't process all of the information of all of the things that were going on. And so because I tend to internalize the information and then try to navigate through it over time, it became like my computer had to shut down. So the fourth is emotional reactivity. This one tends to come more when you're feeling attacked or when you're feeling like somebody's giving you criticism, as constructive as that criticism may be. Our tendency as HSPs is to not just become defensive, but physically feel that feedback in our bodies. And so we'll start to blush red. We'll start to look around the room for some sort of escape route. We'll start to go through all of the reasons why whatever it is that the other person is saying may be right or wrong. And when we try to say those things out of our mouth, they become like word gibberish. And so we just don't say anything because our brain starts to shut down. And so the interesting thing about these characteristics is I can have the same exact conversation about these 4 types in a positive way. Like, for example, at dinner the other night, the subtlety that I noticed was that somebody wasn't eating a type of food on their plate. And I asked them, do you not like blah, blah, blah? And they said, oh, I'm a vegetarian. So now I know an interesting fact about somebody that I didn't know. The depth of processing was I noticed the subtlety. I took the information into my brain. I thought to myself, I wonder if that's something they don't care for. Then was able to ask a question about it and engage in a relationship that prevented me from becoming overstimulated by the, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Did I not ask enough questions before we prepared food and things like that? So the depth of processing actually helped me be more thoughtful to the person and prevented me from becoming overstimulated by the fear that we had done something wrong. And then the emotional activity was kindness, right? Somebody gave me feedback about something that they didn't eat. And then I was able to say, oh, can I get you something else? And so as much as we tend to think about the negative things that are associated with our personality traits, there's lots of really wonderful things that are also associated. I just want to encourage you, we don't always have to think about the things that we have to work on. Sometimes these are the things that we can like shout for joy about. I, for one, really enjoy people in my life who are thoughtful. So to me, that would be something really kind that somebody would do for me if they noticed that. Some considerations as you're thinking about this type of biological thought process phenomenon. HSPs may take a little bit longer to adapt to new situations. One of the most prominent things that we notice with this is new jobs. It may take new employees longer to acclimate to a new workplace, new workflow, new expectations, new boss. It also happens with people who get like promoted, move to other departments. Sometimes we forget that folks who take a little bit longer to process information or folks who become overstimulated or overwhelmed very quickly just need a little extra time to be able to navigate through some of those difficulties. And from a boss's perspective, that may seem inappropriate, right? Like when people panic or they become afraid or frustrated, they tend to freak out. Like fight or flight type emotional responses. And so sometimes we just need to allow people those extra couple of moments to be able to process through the information and then give some sort of response about what they need. We talked a little bit about the increased sensitivity to sensory stimulation. This is all of your outward senses, sight, smell, hearing, speaking volume, things like that. Often we're told that we're being too sensitive, taking things personally, too shy. Oh, I forgot the quote in overdramatic again when I was going through it. Sorry, guys. But we're often told that we're overdramatic, right? That we're like blowing things up or making a big deal out of it, when in actuality, we're just trying to process the information that we have. I need to get off of that slide. Whew. So here are some of the amazing benefits. Well, actually, are there any questions about what we talked about so far? I can only see a couple of you, so I don't know if there's any like hands raised or anything. Any thoughts or questions? Awesome. So here's some really cool things about folks who are highly sensitive. One, this is a self-reported research study. So there are some things that are kind of subjective, but HSPs report very, very deep, intimate bonds with other people. So they tend to be the folks that are very loyal. They tend to be the folks that have a hard time dismissing relationships, even if they're not being fed in them. And they often have really, really close bonds with people who are in their inner circle. So having those deep, intimate connections with others can help us feel safe, help us feel like there are people that understand us, and help us feel like when we do need something, there are people who are always going to show up if we need them. I thought this second one was actually really cool. Like, I didn't realize this. I don't think I put this together, but people who are highly sensitive, because of the depth of processing that we go through, we can have super vivid dreams, like dreams where you could swear that it's actually happening to you. And then you wake up and you're like, did that happen? Like, did I sleepwalk through that? But one thing that they found that folks really reported were these like inner monologues. And I mean, I had imaginary friends when I was a kid, so I used to call this like conversations with my imaginary friends. But I do inner monologues all the time. Like, I will go through a potential conversation with somebody, like from literal start to, hey, how are you? How's things going? Blah, 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 all the way to the, well, I really didn't like the way that we did this, and yada, yada. Like, I will literally have those monologues go through my head like on a regular basis. And so I thought it was really interesting that because this sensory perception is so astute, and the processing is so time consuming, that we can tend to have those like experiences in our heads. And it fascinates me because I want to like listen to these monologues of other people, because now I feel much more typical or standard. So I thought that one was really interesting. Another benefit that HSPs reported was like really genuine, authentic enjoyment when they connect with somebody. So I think about friendships that you've had for like a long period of time, or friends that you meet that you feel kind of instantly connected with, and there's a genuineness to the connection that you have. Folks really feel like they can be more authentic in their relationships when they have this highly sensitive tendency. We also tend to be really emotionally intelligent. To me, that would make sense, right? Because my line of work, I sit and I listen to people tell me all kinds of things all day long. And all of that requires a lot of ability to process things that are very heavy, things that are very joyful. And it makes sense to me that somebody who engages in therapy would have this ease with emotional intelligence, right? Being able to process information and be able to sort of give it back in the relationship so that people get a natural effect or benefit out of our relationship. So HSPs tended to score much higher on the emotional intelligence scale, which makes sense also with genuine enjoyment with connection and deep, intimate bonds with other people. The last one is, you will find that folks who are highly sensitive tend to operate with a super high level of tact. So I don't think this is a foolproof thing. Like, I don't think every single HSP is like this, but they do tend to operate with more thoughtfulness. And so from thoughtfulness comes, when you give feedback, it tends to be a little bit gentler. So instead of saying something like, yeah, I hate that, they would probably stop for 5 to 6 seconds and say, let me think about that. I'm not sure that's the direction I was going. So it's interesting to me that some of these benefits, first of all, I think they're all intertwined. And second of all, these are folks that are like very kind and thoughtful, but sometimes that's misinterpreted and thought to be arrogance. You ever notice people who are quiet? Sometimes folks tend to think that they're arrogant. Sometimes that happens. So the other cool thing is a little self-serving, I think, but another cool benefit is that HSPs tend to find more success in psychological interventions. So they did a little side study for all the HSPs that they studied. I think it was something in the tens of thousands. And then they pulled out everyone that had been involved in some sort of psychotherapy, whether it was family therapy, individual marriage counseling, things like that. And they found that a great majority of the HSPs who were involved in psychotherapy reported a pretty significant benefit from it. And what's even more interesting is they reported that the benefit wasn't necessarily tangible. Like they did find that there was benefits in their relationships and their communication and whatever their presenting issue was, but they also felt that the relationship with their therapist was beneficial overall because it helped to teach them how to be safe in a relationship with somebody who understood them. So that's another part where that emotional intelligence comes in too. Any questions? Any other benefits that you guys think like might fall in line with this? So you're all fascinated by these benefits and you're like, maybe I am HSP. I do all of those good things. Isn't it funny? Like you can just as quickly assume that the negative stuff or the less beneficial stuff that we talk about is you, but then you hear good things and you're like, no, I do that. No, I'm pretty tactful. Yeah, this is probably me for sure. So this is not something you should worry about. Again, the topics that we talk about, first of all, are interesting to me. So thank you all for sharing that kind of space with me. But I don't ever want these things to be motivators to be down on yourself or think that there's something quote unquote wrong with you. Even when we talk about the more difficult things like anxiety and depression, these aren't things that you need to go home and sort of like wring your hands about. These are really things that I hope will provide you with some motivation to understand yourself at a deeper level. And so when we talk about things like, am I an HSP? I'm going to go take this quiz. And then what do I do with the answer? It's really about awareness. And the story that I shared last time about our old roommate has really kind of stuck with me over the last few weeks. And I've been thinking a lot about our relationship and the things that like I maybe could have done differently, something I could have said differently, things like that. But at the end of the day, sometimes that type of relationship exists because it teaches you something. It's the same thing with learning that you might be a highly sensitive person. Not only do we tend to think like, oh, now there's something else I have to do differently. It's actually that we just need to understand that sometimes we just need to be more aware of what's happening around us. And so in the research, they definitely found that the like perceived negative versus positive or, tougher things versus beneficial things, they definitely balanced each other out, just like any other trait that we understand about ourselves. But they also found that it makes total sense to me, increased brain activation. So this means that you're more likely to single task well, or you're more likely to multitask and get all your tasks done, as opposed to me who tries to multitask and just fails at all of them because I'm only a single tasker. They found that HSPs had increased empathy. So they're able to feel with other people and they're able to understand the personalities of other people. They're able to understand the reactions of others and be able to sort of negotiate that information in their brain and come up with a reaction that's appropriate. They tend to pay attention more and they really tend to like move the needle, right? So like if X is happening, I'm aware that Y is happening, and I think we need to do Z because Z is going to be the most effective way. They tend to be much more able to sort of like fire on all cylinders, if you will. So the short answer is no, you absolutely do not need to worry about this. but it might be a cool opportunity for you to learn about why you feel certain ways in certain situations. So in our day-to-day, HSPs have lots of really great traits, but here's a couple of things that I found really helpful as an HSP. One is we tend to notice things that other people don't. So I can think about when I was the director at the nonprofit and we would do interviews, we almost always interviewed with more than one person because we wanted one, probably to intimidate the person who was being interviewed. That would make sense. But two, because when one person was asking questions and listening to the answer, the second person could be observing things like body language. So our social skills tend to be more robust. We may not be overtly or outwardly extroverted. There are 70% of us that are not, but we do pick up on things like body language. We think up, when you're on a Zoom call and you notice that somebody's not paying attention to the screen or not making eye contact with you. Somebody may not notice that, but an HSP will be very, very heightenedly aware of that. I tend to be more aware of what's going on in the background of my clients' Zooms, like if they have a dog or if there's a window where like the sun is, going behind clouds and coming up. Like I tend to notice that stuff more often. And I especially tend to notice when people do things like this, because they're like trying to get away from whatever the discussion is, or when people do things like this and they start to like try to hide from the screen. So HSPs tend to be like just much more observant with kind of those subtle cues that not everyone notices. I think too, one of the tougher things about being observant like that is because there's an increased sensitivity to those sorts of things, and because you notice them, it takes even more for you to go, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me, I'm not boring, people are listening, I swear. So I think that's where the inner monologue thing became so interesting to me, right? Is we tend to think about these sort of negative parts, but in actuality, most of the time somebody's like scratching their leg or their dog opened the door with their nose when the door was closed, things like that tends to almost never be about the HSP, even though we tend to notice more of it. Our sense of empathy offers this really unique ability to be insightful about other people. So if you think about the power and control dynamic in an office, for example, folks who are highly sensitive tend to pay more attention to what works or doesn't work in their workplace. So I had a boss who would become overwhelmed very quickly. And like, I think a month into my employment, I noticed that when she became overwhelmed, there was lots of like, I can't talk to you right now. I don't have time for that. Don't ask me a question right now. I'm very busy. There tended to be a lot of reactionary stuff, and that doesn't work for a lot of people. So we started to talk about ways that managers and directors and C-suite could actually create space for them to get their tasks done, and then sort of like worked our way around her grouchiness to give her opportunities to be able to have more time to work on her tasks. So we tend to be more observant, but we also tend to help problem solve when it comes to confusion about other people's behaviors. So I think it goes to say that because of that sort of extra detection technique or tendency, HSPs tend to be like really good negotiators and really good leaders because their focus is almost always on other people. The sensitivity to environment one is actually something I'm going to spend a lot more time understanding, because it's not just the excess volume, excess light, things like that. It's also environmental cues. So let's say, I was trying to think of a really good one for you guys, but I really could only come up with my street outreach examples. I would meet with a lot of people on like the corners of streets or like the corner of the park. And we'd be standing and I'd be holding my bag and they would be holding their things. And we'd be having a conversation about whatever, whether it's going to the doctor or treatment or getting food or, any multitude of things. And I was always very tired after those street outreach days. And now I realize it's because I'm standing. So my feet hurt because I'm not able to sit down. I am watching all of the cars and people go by in both corners of my eye so that I know if something potentially dangerous is going to happen. And I'm trying to focus on the conversation that I'm having with my person. So the sensitivity to the environment isn't just the overstimulation part, it's also the notice part. So in the right setting, like in an office, HSPs might be the first ones to notice an odd smell, or the first ones to notice fire, or the first ones to notice like boxes piled in the hallway that could create a dangerous situation. So HSPs are like really good to have around. You want to hire at least a couple of them, and you probably want to promote them. So that being said, I think, again, awareness, right? This isn't about like going home and spending hours and hours and hours diving into HSP, but this is really like taking a moment to sort of sit back and say, is this something that I deal with? Like, do I find myself easily irritated or easily set off by lots of traffic or a really crowded store? Or when I have to wait in line for a long period of time and it feels like nothing is moving and changing and there's lots of noises and I become sort of overwhelmed by that. So give yourself permission to be able to start to notice and understand these types of traits so that you can understand what to do with that. I know that it's like Friday night at 5 o'clock is not my time to go to the grocery store ever. Sunday at 3 p.m. is not my time to go to Costco, like ever, because it's going to drive me bananas and I'm probably going to miss 3 things on my list. And then I'm going to get home and I'm going to be mad because I missed things on my list. So it allows you to really create opportunities where you can be your healthiest version of yourself without being a detriment. Like just because I like to get to Costco right at, I think it's 9:30 that they open now, right at 9:30, it means I get a good parking spot. It means I get a clean cart, and it means like I can go do my business. I can get my stuff, and then I can get out and go home and enjoy the rest of my day. An interesting one for me too, and I think might be super relevant for you guys at KW, is making sure you plan for times to process information. This is a very general statement, but I think about like when you're meeting with your subordinates or your bosses, try not to have those conversations in a rushed way, because you're going to need A, some time to process some information, B, some time to like ask questions if you need to, and C, you might need to just allow yourself maybe a half hour or so to like process the information that happened in that conversation. Say you're having an eval or you're getting some constructive criticism on a document that you did. Give yourself the time to be able to kind of sit with that afterwards so that you're not carrying that heaviness around with you all day long or into the next day. And again, you may not be an HSP, but understanding these tendencies will give you so much power in your relationships. If you don't identify with this at all, fantastic, you're not an HSP. However, you can be way more aware of other people's behavior, and it gives you a lot of the power in the relationship and in the conversation. You'll know how to relate to somebody and how to get what you need out of that conversation by being able to acclimate to the things that they do or their tendencies. Don't go using this as a manipulation technique. It's not what we're saying, but if you understand that sometimes folks just need extra time or a different kind of environment, for example, somebody does better with walking meetings. Like if you're going to get 10 times more done in a meeting with somebody, but it requires you to walk around the block, hands down, walk around the block, because you're going to be happier, they're going to be happier, and probably the project's going to get done faster. So this will help you understand how people react to you so that you can use that information in a positive and non-controlling way. So what are your thoughts? I'm super curious about, now that we focused on some of the benefits, if more of you think you're HSPs. Chad, are you trying to determine whether or not you are? Is that the face I'm seeing?
Oh no, I definitely am. But you know, I thought, is there any correlation? And I'm not being funny, I'm being serious. Is there any correlation with, you know how autism, the spectrum of autism has sensitivity to the environment? Is there any kind of correlation with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, you can fall on the autism spectrum disorder and also be an HSP. it's going to be hard for you to not have heightened sensitivity if you are diagnosed with ASD. However, not every HSP is going to fall on the autism spectrum. So it's one of those things where the symptoms don't create the diagnosis. The diagnosis needs to be determined based on the experiences that the person is having. So just because you have these 4 traits and you're on the autism spectrum disorder spectrum, that was a terrible way of saying that, doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can be both, but you don't have to be.
And
Good
who
question,
do I get my placard so I can park closer to the mall from? Is it you, or is there a department that I send it out to?
I mean, any mental health professional can sign off on that form, but I think.
Well, let's see. There's 13
think,
people in the room, so I think you're going to get 12 applications.
I think what you should consider, or, I hate the word should, but what you could consider is, do I need special accommodations, or is this something that I need to be aware of? Generally speaking, because I've understood this about myself for quite some time now, I think it's been 3.5, 4 years. I don't need accommodations the same way that I did when I first started wrestling with my sensitivity. I've always been a kind of sensitive kid, right? Like friendships affect me deeply, loss affects me deeply, all those sorts of things. But I just thought it was something about my personality that was just kind of like how I am. You guys know I'm adopted, so maybe I got it from some part of my family tree that I just don't know, because neither one of my parents are like this at all. So, I don't need people to do anything differently. I just need to be more aware of what I need in situations, especially social ones, because I'll get somewhere and I'll be having a good time with my friends, and I'll be eating at a cookout or whatever. And then all of a sudden I'm like, nope, gotta go. I'm done. my meter's full. I gotta go. So to answer your question, I know you're doing a little bit of a kind of joke, but I think really it's just about understanding what you need in situations and becoming accustomed to it. But if you want me to sign off on a placard, I'll consider it. All right. Oh, you feel like this, is it Guaranga? Is that how you say it? Or do you go by Anthony? So now you feel convinced that you're an HSP?
Yes, because of definitely vivid dreams, inner monologue. I was considered the shy kid growing up. Yeah, there's a few other things as well, but those are the main things that I realized.
Were you here last month?
No.
So the Highly Sensitive Person is a book that you can read. It's brilliantly written. I kind of charged through it in a day. But what it does is it breaks down sort of where this neurological phenomenon came from and why they studied it. And I didn't go into a ton of depth about that today. I did a little bit last month, but I think if you're interested in this and you want to know more about it, the book, especially the audiobook, because the person who narrates it has a lovely reading voice. So it sort of lulls you while you're listening. Do you ever hear audiobooks and you're like, if anyone else was reading this, it would be fine, but this person's voice is no good. But the narrator is fantastic. So I would highly encourage you to read it if it's interesting to you.
What's the title again?
The Highly Sensitive Person. And the last name of the author is Aron, like Nancy.
You gave a lot of good insight in terms of just being aware of your environment. I've definitely always noticed that. I'm like, I had noticed so much more than the average person. It drives me crazy. I don't know. I should just walk out of the room right now. And I don't know, do you have any suggestions on how to, you had the planning, how to plan around these things, or even personality, just being sensitive to people's personalities and the environment. Why doesn't anyone else notice this? Is it just me? Yeah. So how to kind of navigate through group situations or your environment. I want to change this, but I know I can't.
Sure. So examples like you're in a training and you're sitting in the middle of the room and you're like, if I get up, everyone's going to look at me and then I'm going to feel even worse because then everybody's going to look at me. And then then that inner monologue like really goes on fire, right? Because then you're convinced everyone in the room hates you, you're going to get fired, like nobody's ever going to invite you to a thing again. Like the catastrophizing that happens with folks who are extremely sensitive to their environments is just astounding sometimes. I'll give you one personal life suggestion and one work life suggestion, both things that I've learned through kind of my own experimenting. But in professional settings, and a lot of you know this because you've heard me say this a million times, always take a breath before you make a decision. Like nobody's going to notice that you do it. It's not going to be weird, especially if all of you are doing it. You're all going to know. None of you are going to notice, and you're all going to know you're doing it because I told you to. But always take a breath before you make a decision. When you look at your calendar and somebody's pushing you for a meeting and you know that you need that time in between meeting 17 and meeting 18, like say no. Like I'm not available at that time. We're going to have to find another time, because you are fairly confident that when that day comes, you're going to be super mad that you added that meeting in, and you're going to really want to stab yourself in the eye when you have to meet with one more person. So when you're making decisions, take that breath and think to yourself, like, is this really conducive to me having a healthy day? Actually, I take that back. I'm going to give you two. In a group setting, like let's say you're going to a mastermind, you're going to some sort of training, and it's going to be like informationally heavy, and you're going to be taking in a lot of light, a lot of sound, and a lot of other people. I would sit either in the front of the room on the end of the row or the back of the room at the end of the row. Even like double bonus points if it's a like stadium seating and there's a thing and there's a row in the middle, like sit on the very outside. Because then if you do become overwhelmed or overstimulated, you can exit the room with very few people paying attention to what you're doing. I think by doing that, even just making the plan for having an escape route will probably make you feel safer, right? It's something like the placebo effect, right? Where you take a pill, you don't know what's in it, and you're convinced it works because you took the pill. If you make the plan, it's unlikely that you'll become overstimulated. If you do, though, out you go. Personally, I had to just tell my friends. Like I have a really understanding spouse. You guys know, I think Tommy's like the most amazing human in the entire world, and he's very accommodating and very kind to me. So, and I didn't become this, I have not been this way my whole life. In my 20s, like, that TikTok that's like club, bus, another club, bus, another club. That was me. Like every night I was out with my friends till 3 a.m, having a great time. And then as I kind of got into my 30s and definitely into my 40s, that's like literally my nightmare. Like that's my waking up naked in a classroom nightmare. So my suggestion is to just sort of have that conversation with people as it comes up socially. And then I might try and avoid restaurants at 5 o'clock on a Friday, because that you're likely not going to enjoy the experience. So go at, 7 or go at 3, make it your last meeting of the day, full disclosure, just go have your dinner at 3 p.m. and then eat your other dinner at home. But I found that my friends stopped thinking I was rude when I explained to them, yep, my jar's full, can't do it anymore. Because a lot of times it'll happen like when we're hanging out in the driveway of a friend's house, or like things like that are supposed to be casual, but they're actually like, as they cumulatively go longer and longer, my meter is going down and down and down and down. So those are my suggestions. And I totally saw you nodding too with the Friday night restaurant. Yeah. You guys, I walked into the deck. Have you guys went to Queen Kapiolani, the deck where you have that like 180 view of Diamond Head? I walked in at like 5 o'clock a couple Fridays ago, and I was like, oh, I would rather be anywhere else. Anywhere else. But I toughed it out. And then It was okay. Oh, Raylan, I've invited my friends to come. I'm sorry that Ashley's not here. Ashley's actually in Honolulu at my house, working and watching my dogs. So she'll join us next time. But yeah, I think this is open, Chad, right? Like people are allowed to come. One of the guys that I sit on a board with came last month, and then he emailed me after and said, I'm totally an HSP. Can you please tell me more? So that too.
I also, just to make one more comment, I listened to this blog the other day and it said something about a social introvert. Is that
Ooh.
similar to something like this? Because some of the things that they were talking about in this blog, it's like, oh, this sounds very familiar. So
Social introvert. I'm totally going to go Google that when we're done. I love when you guys share stuff like that with me. Chad, can I tell you that it's a little bit weird that I can see your picture and you at the same time? Like you're on two sides of the grid.
The world doesn't need two of me. That's scary, but that's Jewel taking my identity.
I know, but so Omnivert has actually been, I know you're in jest a little bit, but it's actually being studied, like this sort of idea of the mix of an introvert and extrovert. Because I would consider myself an extroverted introvert. Love public speaking, love big crowds. I mean, I love being like videotaped and love having my picture taken, things like that. Lots of things that introverts like, just it makes their skin crawl. However, when I go do something big, like even after, remember when we did the mindset in person in town? After that, I went home and took the rest of the day off because it was like just enough like social stimulation and like standing in front of people and things like that, that like I needed to rest for the rest of the day. So that was really interesting to me too, because I was like, oh, it wasn't a very big thing, but I definitely needed the time to kind of recharge.
Heather,
Are we not going to hear from Alan?
Sorry,
Would
Heather.
you like to hear from me? Wait, we'll let Ann go. Go ahead, Ann.
I just wanted to ask Heather what you call that type of personality that you just you mentioned, you know, like public speaking, all of that. But then when it's time to, you know, socialize with everyone, you're kind of like, okay, I'm good. You know, is that what?
I think it's a combination of extroversion and introversion. I do think we have a tendency to want to put ourselves in some sort of box because it helps us make sense of things. The truth is, you know, Anne and all of you, you're all lovely, wonderful humans. When we talk about something like this, it makes it a like big thing in our head, but we don't need to put ourselves like on a platform that defines like, I'm an introvert, so I need to do this. I would love it if all of you sort of took this and thought to yourself like, okay, I'm going to be a little more aware of how I feel when I'm in certain situations, like that mindset where I was in person. It was so strange to me to go home and be like, wow, like why do I feel like I need a recharge? But what I did was I just sort of listened and thought to myself, oh, well, maybe that was just enough extroversion for me today. Nobody else talked to me for the rest of the day, you know, things like that. So, like I said, I would consider myself an extroverted introvert because I like both of those things. Ashley is an introverted introvert. For those of you that have met Ashley when she's been on Mindsets, she would rather do anything else besides public speaking. She would rather do one-on-one at home, you know, things like that. So I think it's just helping us understand our tendencies and what makes us feel good and what makes us feel joyful and how we get fed. And that's what helps us feel safer in our environments. I think it's especially important for you guys in your workplace because the more aware you are of other people, the more you can acclimate to their needs and they can acclimate to yours. And then your relationships just become much more beneficial.
Is there such a thing as a moderately sensitive person?
Hey, I would just call you human.
Okay.
Because it's interesting that you asked that question, because you can resonate with pieces of this and be like, wow, that really is me. But it's likely that that's just a personality trait. If you only fit into kind of one or two of those categories, it's likely just something about you that is who you are. The reason that the Aarons did this research was they wanted to help people understand this tendency or this kind of way of being and give it a positive name and start to associate sensitivity with positivity, as opposed to, you're so sensitive. What?
So dramatic. You're so,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God. I need to go fix that quotation mark right now because over dramatic.
So is it kind of, with those 4,
Characteristics.
yeah, sorry, my brain is it kind of an all or nothing thing?
The research is lending towards that, where they really want you to have all 4 of those to fit sort of neatly in this phenomenon, because they're theorizing that it's biological. And so if you only have 1 or 2, it's likely that it's not something that you either sort of genetically, took over from your family, or, something that's sort of biologically ingrained in you. I think if they were studying HSPs as a personality thing, then you could say you were, moderately sensitive, but they're really leaning into using functional MRIs to read brain activity, to like see where areas light up when they ask the questions on the quizzes that they give.
Is there research that kind of research being conducted presently on that?
Yep.
Okay.
It's super cool. There was even something that came out that was in like 2007. There wasn't enough room in today's presentation to talk about it, but that was where they started talking about the MRIs and the data that they gathered from interviewing people while their brain was like lighting up in different areas. And it was pretty cool. So I think we'll be hearing more about it.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the clock and it says 3:59 where I am. So I do want to honor your guys' Friday. And I am so grateful that this topic resonated with you enough to talk about it twice. So I'm very, very grateful to all of you for sharing some space with me and asking your questions. And again, if you need anything, you can always text me or email me. It's heather@changeworkshawaii.com. Chad has it. If any of you need it, Jewel has it. If any of you need it, you can always follow up with me that way. You're welcome, Danielle. Thank you for coming. And I hope you have a happy Friday.
Mahalo
Thanks,
nui. Thanks,
always.
Heather. Yep.
Yeah, my pleasure. So nice to see all of you. I love that Alan always waves to me. Bye, you guys. Have